Now, you told me that Bino told you he only had one regret.
Oh, that's my all-time favorite Bino story. One day we were talking in the room. It was sort of like the green room, getting ready for class. We'd sit in there and trade stories, and Bino was sitting there, and he always wore a coat and tie. Never saw him without one, coat and tie. And he got up and put on his coat, and he was starting to leave the room, and he was talking about his experiences at Vandy, as he always called it, in 1949.
And notice the and.
Always the and, 1949 or whatever the date was. And he was telling me about Rob Roy Purdy and all the other gang down there. And he's walking out the door, and he stops in just the most serious look on his face. He says, "You know, Hal, I only have one regret in my education," and of course, like a fish, I bet. And I said, "Well, Bino, what was that?" And he looked at me and he said, "I just regret that I didn't have a chance to have me as a professor." And one of the things Bino did when he got you with a joke is he rubbed his hands. And if it was an especially good joke, he'd rub them twice. He'd stop and he'd go, "Well, he got me," and he headed out the door. But I'll always remember that story, and I remember Bino with such fondness. He was just one of the real lions around the English
And being
department.
from Vandy, he had really known some people. So one of the things that Bino did was he started the Summer Creative Writing Conference at English department, and it's probably been going on, what, 48 years or something like that now. Yeah. And one of the guests he had was Robert Penn Warren. Another time he had his good friend, Jesse Stewart, come over. And I remember one day, Hal goes walking in the office, and there's Bino talking to somebody, and Hal doesn't know who it is, and?
Didn't know him from Adam, and I'm in there just talking, and sure enough, it's Jesse Stewart. And he's telling me about teaching. He's talking about all the things, and you know, I finally did have enough sense to get his autograph for my nephew, who was a big fan of his.
For his nephew.
But yeah, that's what I told him at least. But it was really funny for us to come up as young teachers and to have the Kellys, and to have the Phil Mankins, and to have the Binos, and to have some of the women in our department. A time when maybe women weren't as valued some places. We had teachers in our department, some of our very best, the Janet Oldhams of the department, Amy Alexander, Barbara Souders, who would come along in our day with our group. We had some just totally tremendous, Edith Williams, a great scholar, just figures who were, they were ready to go and toe the line right with the men, and so we came up in that kind of thing.
Yeah, scholarship too.
Yeah.
So, but they both had, all of those folks you mentioned had the benefit of Kelly Thurman and Bino Rhodes kind of mentoring them along. And a lot of you who know Hal Blythe and Charlie Sweet know that they've been collaborators on various kinds of scholarly work for 20 or 30 years, I guess. And they were telling me just before we went on the air that they got their start in collaboration right here in the Perkins building. No, I'm sorry, right here in the TV studio was another place then. Back in the mid-'70s. One of you tell us a little bit how that happened.
First of all, we were collaborators, and you know, that's the norm in the television industry. There's an old saying in Hollywood that nothing is written, everything is rewritten. Whereas in academia, for the most part, other than the sciences, it tends to be a solitary effort. So in the spirit of television, we started collaborating on some basic TV scripts. No, we had never done them before in our lives. We had certainly never written before in our lives. But one day we just decided, well, we've got to get away from the school. Because if you sit in your office and try to write, you know, everybody comes wandering in. Students, faculty members, phone rings. So we went to where we thought no one would know where we are, and we went to McDonald's. And we just found a booth there, and we just ordered lunch and just sat down and started writing. Well, we wrote there for what, almost 20 years.
Yeah. We had a great relationship with them. In fact, Charlie was telling you a little bit earlier, McDonald's actually underwrote a couple of our productions here at Eastern.
The first was the Royal Easter Egg Riddle, which was everything in those days was 26 minutes, so it fit into a half-hour segment. And it was basically all about what happens at Easter, who paints the Easter eggs.
We did it as a musical. In fact, Dick Henson, one of the people in the music department, wrote original music.
And he was one of our tennis opponents.
That's how we knew him. But he wrote the music for it, and it was actually a musical. It was a quite fun thing to do, but doing a TV production back then was a little different from doing it now. We had, as we call it, dinosaur equipment, and we had to edit by hand. The 2-inch kind of film they had, and we were moving things around. And we were over at the Donovan Annex many nights after midnight working. Charlie built the sets and just really
So we did that with them. Let's see, then we did the Stowaway on Santa's Sleigh, which was a Christmas special. And other than that, we did actually 11 educational scripts for a series called Keys to Communication. And what we did is, this was basically the era when Sesame Street was, I guess, I don't think it had started yet. But what we did was take and embed serious topics within a popular format. So for instance, in order to teach students how to write an essay, we used the ABC Wide World of Sports, and we had the 20th Annual Essay Olympiad, and we had the people actually, doing the writing of it. We did another show called Logical Fallacies that we basically based on the Johnny Carson show, and we had a host who had Johnny down pat, right down to that pencil. And we would have the logical fallacies, like general diversions, would show up as Johnny's guest, and Johnny would interview the personification, and the personification would create all the logical errors represented by, say, general diversions.
We had a great time doing those because we were lucky enough to have some really good actors from around the area. Eddie Kennedy from down in Berea, a kind of legendary teacher in his own right, down there, came up to do the Johnny Carson and had a big time with that. He was Johnny Carson,
okay.
And did a really fabulous job with that. Probably our most fun of all the TV shows we did was one we did called Dick and Jane Visit the Library. And we did the whole thing on the student perception of the library as a house of horrors. And so we had Dick and Jane, who had to do a term paper on the recent Transylvania, USA garlic deal. So they had to go to the library, and we played it with the haunting music and all this kind of stuff, and the organ,
and Count Yorgi Bibliophile.
And they were played as a vampire and his assistant, and we took everybody through the library, and it was a torture chamber in the room for documents and all that. And then at the end, when finally Dick and Jane say, this place is not a house of horrors, it's really a great, and Yorgi says, you've broken the ages-old library curse, and all of a sudden a puff of smoke comes up, and Yorgi and Igor are transformed out of their cape and medieval outfits into leisure suits. You remember, it was the 70s. And we play the song I Can See Clearly Now, the pop song in the background, and we have them coming out of the library, and they actually took a shot of Dick and Jane in slow motion, running out of the Crab Library, and we read lines from Milton as Adam and Eve leave the Garden of Eden. And so it did come full circle. We went back to Vino for the reading of Milton. So lots of fun.